This is Molly Livingstone on The Big Falafel here on Voice of Israel. And I have a Voice of Israel you guys want to meet. This is Corey Gil-Shuster from the project Ask an Israeli, Ask a Palestinian. And it is exactly as it sounds. So first of all, Corey, thank you for joining us here in the studios today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And I want to get right into it because I'm so fascinated by this project. I've seen your videos online where you essentially you get user-generated questions,
Yep.
and then you go to the streets all over Israel asking Israelis and Palestinians these questions. And we're going to hear a little bit of the video later on. But let's start with you, Corey.
Sure.
How did you end up in Israel?
First time I came on an overseas program in the late 80s, 1989. Not because it was Israel, just sort of a place to go. I was supposed to come with a friend. And I just it took me a few months of hating this country. And then I kind of fell in love with the chaos and the insanity. And
You were coming from Canada.
And I came from Canada.
Very different.
Exactly the opposite. Although my family is a little bit chaotic, so that might be part of the allure here. So then I came back and I wanted to know more about Israeli society and a little bit more about Palestinian society at the time, but never really found a way to do it. So I ended up just living in Tel Aviv. Then I met the guy who became my husband, who's Israeli from many generations.
And then you get stuck here. That's
and
what
then
happened to me.
and then we got stuck here, not in a negative sense. And then we lived here for years. We moved back to Canada at a certain point, have a child, that sort of thing. So now I'm back.
So now you're back, and you've been doing this project, Ask an Israeli, Ask a Palestinian, for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about how the project got started.
Sure. When we were back in Canada, I was working for the government of Canada, and I was doing a master's in conflict studies part-time, University of Ottawa, St. Paul University. And it was a way of putting an understanding around what I had experienced with Israeli culture when it comes to the conflict. And it was a way to sort of put it all into perspective and understand more about what's going on through theoretical ideas. Then we moved back right after I finished the degree. And when looking for a job, which is not easy to find in this country, I get into a lot of Facebook groups and online groups of people asking questions about Israel, mostly from outside, and Palestinians or Arabs from other countries, debating and discussing Israel. And it's very apparent that the way they see Israel does not match the reality that I experienced anyways. And I admit I never really lived in the West Bank or in Jerusalem. It was always on the coast, either on a moshav or in the city in Tel Aviv. But it never matched my reality of who Israelis were and what Israel was like. And at one point, somebody said, actually, she was French-Canadian, she said something about, Israelis will think this. And I said, I don't think so. From the people I know, and I speak Hebrew well, and no, that doesn't make any sense. She said, what are you going to do? Ask each and every one of them? And I thought, that's a really good idea. I have a video camera. Maybe I'll just go out to the streets and just ask people. So I asked, not in the same group, but in a different group, I said, look, I have this idea. To ask people questions. I need a question. I don't want to think up the question. I want you guys to come up with something that's interesting to you, because I also wanted to know from the Arab perspective, or from people living in the Arab world or Palestinians living outside the region, what is their question going to be? Because that just the question itself tells you a lot about what they think.
Right.
Nobody would give me a reply. Nobody gave me a question for a really long time. And then finally, I think it was through an argument, I can't even remember, it was about 3 years ago, about the one-state solution, and yes, Israelis will agree to it. I don't know. As I said, can I take that as a question to bring up with people? And I think that was my first one. So I asked Israelis just in my neighborhood. Some people I knew, some people I didn't. Would they accept a one-state solution to the conflict, meaning West Bank, Gaza, Israel? Would they accept that? And I had 8 responses, something like that. It was the first video, and I just put them together. I didn't leave out anything. I didn't cut anything.
And it was Israelis and Palestinians?
No, at this point it was just Israelis.
Israelis.
And I thought, wow, when I saw it all together, I didn't know anything about filming or editing, actually. I used my husband's Mac iMovie, no idea what I was doing.
Very basic.
Couldn't even figure out how to do subtitles, so I had to ask people in English. So I just put them together. I didn't edit out anything, and I put it on YouTube and said, here it is. And then from there, I could see that there was a certain power to it, to allowing people to explain their side themselves and through their words. And so I decided that whatever happens, I'll get more questions. There's certain rules I'll make around the project where I have to include everything. Nothing gets left out. I mean, I edit, but I don't edit for content. Like, meaning, I edit out the name sometimes because some people don't like to use their real name or something.
I've noticed also sometimes maybe you won't film their face.
Exactly, that's something else. So people, at first, I insisted, and then I said, okay, I'll ease up on it.
Yeah, people don't feel comfortable.
Exactly. So I ask, usually about 8 people. It has to be random. Every so often, I will ask somebody either I know or a friend of a friend, just to, for one, just to sort of see. But it is random. I wander around the streets of. At first, it was all Tel Aviv.
Where are you going? Yeah.
Okay, so at first it was just Tel Aviv, and then people were complaining. Well, of course, Tel Aviv. People are all so left wing, which is not really true. But okay.
Okay, let's go with that.
Let's get sure.
Yourself are. We were talking about this a little bit off the radio. What are you? You're left wing.
I voted Barrett's in the past. I still believe
really
values. Yeah, it's very left wing. In the sense of, I believe, I would like to get to some sort of peace agreement. I believe in the values that Meretz has. I think it's probably one of the only political parties that actually has values about human rights and that we're all equal and that we need to compromise on various issues and whether it's secular or religious or Arab Jewish. That sort of thing. I like that sort of value. But now as I've done, we'll get to that after, but as I've done this project, I think my views have hardened a little bit. We are in the Middle East. We're not living in Europe. My values stay the same, but
before we get there, so tell me, you started out in Tel Aviv.
So I started out in Tel Aviv, and so another rule is I would avoid people who look to me really left-wing. I don't know what that means exactly. But if you see, someone with lots of piercings and
like
tattoos and hipster, and I was like,
I'm done with you.
Yeah, exactly. They're not, every so often, and I do run into them, it happens. But I don't look for them. I look for people who to me look average. It's the young mother or father with kids, the guy who works in a factory, the woman who works in a at the Kupat Cholim, something like that. People who just stand out to me on the street and sometimes in shops or offices. I'll ask people as well. They just look like average people.
And people talk to you? Because you're asking them pretty hardcore questions.
Yeah, first, having a camera, half the people say no.
Yes. Right off the bat.
Mainly women.
Mainly women. I've also known that. I like to do man on the streets, and it's very hard. Women do not like to be approached.
Thank you, because a lot of people claim that I was avoiding women. It's not true.
No, it's really hard for some reason. And it's not like, okay, maybe you're a guy. No, I'm there too. And there's something they don't feel comfortable the way that men do.
Yes.
Who knows why? And I've done it Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, everywhere.
Yeah. And older people sometimes don't feel as comfortable because they don't know where it's going to go. Right. They're not as tech savvy. They're not sure what. A lot of people get very concerned about my politics. What I'm using this for, they think I'm going to edit it. Where's it going? Am I going to embarrass or use it against Israel?
And despite all that, you're still able to find these people to answer these difficult questions. Give us some of the questions you're asking.
Well, they started off. Do you believe in a one-state solution? Would you agree to a two-state solution?
You've asked about the Holocaust.
I've asked. I asked Palestinians what do they know or what do they know about the Holocaust.
You've asked if Americans would be welcome.
Are Americans welcome in Palestinian territories? I get a lot of questions from Arabs or Palestinians outside asking some sort of question which leads to Israel conquered the land in an unfair fashion. Like, for example, why do you kill Arabs and steal their land, or and phrase that way?
Yeah.
And or why do you? If somebody came to your house with a Bible and a gun, and said, "Get out," would you leave? So they sound really harsh, but
Yeah.
look, I live here. I speak Hebrew. I figured, I'll
And
ask
then
that
you
way.
go and ask.
And then I ask that way.
You're
I
like, this
actually
is not
do.
me. This is someone who asked this.
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes I actually introduce it as, like as if I'm asking. Other times I say it's other people are asking. But I put it that way, the way they asked, as if they're in my body asking the question, because even if the person's, and they usually say, what are you talking about? We don't steal land. We don't just kill Arabs. That's ridiculous.
Right.
That, to me, has some value.
Yeah.
Even if, is the question crazy? Is the question not make sense?
I want to talk about feedback, but we're going to take a quick break here on the Big Falafel. And I also want to talk about one of the most interesting questions for me was, would you name a street after a terrorist? And you asked Israelis and Palestinians. So when we get back, we're going to have Corey from the Ask an Israeli, Ask a Palestinian project give us feedback and answers to stuff we still don't have answers to. So stick with us.
This is Ethan Behrman. I'm a talk radio host in California, nationally syndicated and in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm here in Israel, and guess what I listen and subscribe to? voiceofisrael.com. What an absolute pleasure to be joining you here in the new studios of the tremendous Voice of Israel studio right in the heart of Jerusalem. I listen to them. You should too.
You are listening to Voice of Israel. We do hope that you're enjoying our broadcasts, but we are still in our beta period with many more great features coming soon. In the meantime, your feedback will help us serve you better. So tell us what you think. If you have ideas about our shows, our sounds, our downloads, or our live stream, please send a quick email to feedback@voiceofisrael.com.
Voice of Israel, Israel's premier English broadcast network, bringing Israel closer.
And this is Molly Livingstone back from break here on the Big Falafel with the Voice of Israel, Corey Gil-Shuster from the project Ask an Israeli, Ask a Palestinian. I'm a little obsessed with your project, I have to admit, because you really are getting to see what real Israelis and Palestinians are saying on the streets. When we left before the break, you were talking about how you're in Tel Aviv when you were starting out to film this, but obviously you had to go wider.
Yeah.
So where do you film now when you're asking these questions?
Sometimes I take a day and I come to Jerusalem, or I go to Haifa or something like that, specifically to film. Or I have an appointment at, in a doctor's office in Rishon LeZion, so I just bring my camera.
Love
and
it.
I ask 2 or 3 people.
But
there.
what about, like, sometimes I'm always trying to look at your background, right? I'm like, where is he? Is he in the old city? Is he in Tel Aviv? And I'm like, that's definitely a lot of Arabic. Are you actually, like, in places like Ramallah?
Yeah, so for the Palestinian respondents, I go to Palestinian cities, to Ramallah, Bethlehem, Hebron, more complicated to get there.
I bet.
Yeah.
And when you go, have you ever been asked if you're Jewish? Who are you?
Strangely, no. I always go with a Palestinian friend.
Okay.
And someone they know who translates for us. And nobody has ever asked. They introduced me as a Canadian, but nobody has ever said, "Are you Jewish?" They don't seem to care. One guy, there's one video where I took on this kid, and it was kind of an embarrassment because I'm 44 and taking on the 16-year-olds was ridiculous. But he just kept coming up with more and more myths, and I kept everything he said. I said, "No, that's not what happens." And at one point he said in Arabic, and I caught it, "If you were a Jew, I would stab you." Oh. And he kept saying to the translator, "Is he Jewish? Is he a Jew?" And that was the only time that happened.
So are you scared when you do these things? I mean, you're asking very critical, difficult questions. You're scared.
I'm not scared. I'm not scared of when I ask the questions. I'm scared of being in the West Bank, period. The moment I go over the Green Line, actually, I don't care if it's to Jewish settlements or to Palestinian areas. The further I get away from what to me is Israel, it seems, I'm scared. I mean, anything can happen. I've learned to see what are warning signs. Getting people pissed off is never a good idea.
Yeah.
No, but when I'm asking the questions, people don't tend to be that offended necessarily by the question. And sometimes they're hard questions and harsh questions. No, sometimes people with a smile will just, answer in really horrible ways. So I'm often horrified by what they say, but that not necessarily feel threatened. Also, each city has its own culture. So, for example, Ramallah tends to be much more, I would say, anti-Israel, like very, very harsh in its in how people view Israelis, but they're much less violent. Like there's not. It's more of an intellectual and a business center. People are unlikely to be violent.
In the video where you asked Palestinians about the Holocaust, where were you asking that?
Ramallah and Hebron, I think, or
And what
Bethlehem,
were the
can't remember.
answers? I mean, I saw some of it. It seemed like everything was the Jews are just exaggerating.
Yeah, and I knew this. I know in Palestinian society the Holocaust is not taught. If it is talked about, it's talked about how the Jews exaggerated. Only 100,000 or 300,000 Jews were killed. It's in the Palestinian mind. The Holocaust is used as an excuse to create Israel. That's how they see themselves as paying for the sins of the Holocaust.
Wow.
And I knew that going in.
That's very difficult. I mean, we're here in the middle of, we just had this Operation Protective Edge, this 50 days of war. We're kind of in this like ceasefire where news is coming out that they're just rearming Hamas. So it's very hard when you're talking about these difficult narratives where they're saying that, they feel like they're the reason, the Holocaust happened and now they have to suffer for it. That's hard to imagine having peace. And you're coming from a place of when you probably started out. I mean, did you think these were the answers you were definitely going to be getting from both sides?
No, I mean, I knew from Israelis, I'm rarely surprised. Every so often, I think someone is very right-wing and they're not, or very left-wing and they're not. But I rarely get something, a shocking answer or something I had never heard, let's say.
Right.
For Palestinians, I often get answers that I would not expect. And then I have to think about it because it's hard to react when you never heard it. So I have to sort of go home and think, well, where does that come from? And I have to ask friends and, try and get some background to it from there. Because they don't know. What's amazing is that we sort of each of us live in this sort of strange bubble where we think, our history and our truth is truth and that's it. And then you realize that other people have a completely different way of viewing the same things that happen on the ground.
It's unbelievable. So I actually want to talk about a certain video that really captivated me, which was to ask Israelis and Palestinians if they would name streets after terrorists. So on the Jewish side of things, the Israeli side of things, you asked about Baruch Goldstein.
And Ami Popper.
And Baruch Goldstein, he basically shot up a bunch of people in Hebron.
Yeah, in 1994, he went into the mosque synagogue, the Cave of the Patriarch, and he killed 29 Muslims.
And he's interesting because he was a doctor before that, so he has a whole story.
Yep.
And then on the Palestinian side of things, you asked about Dalal Mughrabi.
Mugrab.
I know.
I can't say the word.
It gets stuck right in your mouth because we don't have the ayin, which is the back, that letter in the back of your throat as Anglos. It's very difficult to say that. But a horrible story, terrorist attack, a woman. And
she was a Moroccan woman. I looked her up after, who was pro-Palestinian, came through Lebanon, I think, through the beach, was planning, I think it was to attack soldiers on a bus. That was the plan. Couldn't find or got lost, ended up attacking 2 Egged buses and killed a lot of civilians. I don't remember the number.
Right, those are public buses.
Public buses,
killed civilians, women, children. So these are pretty hard questions, and I want to play just some of the answers. Unfortunately, I'm going to play only the English ones. You did get Hebrew and Arabic, but just for our audience because we don't have subtitles on radio. So let's hear a few of those answers.
Would you name a street after Baruch Goldstein?
No, I wouldn't.
Why not?
Because I think he should be everything but honored for what he did. I think it's awful. I think it's awful that people even consider that.
Okay.
Then it's good. So it depends how I looking. If I looking directly and shallow, and I say no, it's not okay. Okay, if I go like let's say.
Why is it? Wait, first of all, why is it not okay in a shallow way?
Okay, because you are
Provoking.
No, not provoking. Promoting something that it's not okay that killing innocent people. Okay.
Now, let's say they named this street that you're on here, Baruch Goldstein. What do you feel? What is your emotional reaction? Philosophical or moral?
You know what? To tell you the truth, I wouldn't care that less if you call it Baruch Goyim, because I think 99% of the streets, I don't know what they are meaning.
Okay.
So I don't think if they call it, you know what? I don't care.
Okay. So, let's say somebody wanted you to name a street here after Dalal Mughrabi.
Okay.
You know who that is?
Not really. Could you remind me of that? Because there are names, only names. I mean, they did something good for our country, but doesn't mean that if what everybody do good something good for the country, they should be named a street by their name.
Okay.
It's very proud for that because they lose their life for us to be in freedom.
Even though
idea.
Okay.
And everywhere in the world they put the names of the martyrs in the streets. I am against to kill kids and women and civilians. I am against that. But if he fighting for his freedom, why not?
So that was pretty difficult to listen to. I mean,
Yeah.
it seemed from the Israeli side a lot of no, it would be wrong, and it's actually illegal here in Israel to have a street or monument named after terrorists in honor of terrorists. What about on the Palestinian side of things?
First of all, there are monuments and streets named after these people. And by the way, I should point out that I specifically chose individuals who would consider classic terrorists, meaning they weren't leaders, they weren't people who did things they did things in the name of their people, but they weren't part of like leadership. Like, for example, Yasser Arafat or Menachem Begin. I mean, people can claim they were terrorists as well. It was the idea of individuals who took it upon themselves to do something violent for political reasons, on purpose, and see how that's understood by the people.
And you had a wide variety. I mean, so from the Israeli side, it seemed like majority knows, or I don't care. Like names are just names.
And
I don't know.
And that kind of surprised me too. Actually, I expected sort of more. I mean, at least how I would react. Like I would be shocked. And some people were, but a few people, maybe three or four, were just no. They kind of intellectualized it and said, no, it doesn't make much. Like they're against what they did, those people, but they're the idea of having a street named after them, it wasn't as shocking as I thought it should be.
Well, it's funny because I think some people brought it up. I can't remember if it was the English or in the Hebrew that I watched, where they're like, I don't know what the names are anyways of most of these streets. And it's true. And most of the streets, what's funny is you have a Ben Yehuda street here in Jerusalem and you have one in Tel Aviv. Like they have like the same names throughout the countries, but you kind of know what he did. Like Ben Yehuda, recreated the Jewish language. More than that, I can't really tell you. So if there were these streets named after people, you wouldn't necessarily know it.
No, true.
And on the other side of things, when you were talking to the Palestinians, I mean, I was surprised in watching it of how much, yes, they're heroes and you should honor them. And
9 out of 10 said yes. 1 said no because he didn't believe, sort of like Israelis, he saw them as heroes, but he didn't believe that every individual who does something deserves a street name. It should be, real heroes.
So it's still not like a great reason.
No. And it was sort of the people who answered, because then I would point out, well, they killed civilians. And some people said, well, yeah, this is jihad, or this is war. This is what happens. Other people said, well, we're against killing civilians, but they're still heroes. I said, but there's a contradiction there. Right. You're saying and either they would rationalize it by saying, well, then therefore civilians weren't killed, couldn't be, and in their narrative, actually, the civilians weren't killed in their narrative if they know about it, and then others would just say, no, they're heroes, but I'm against killing civilians, but I'm still supporting the heroes.
Well, Corey, as depressing as some of this may sound, and you've even admitted that although your merits, which is very like human rights and this or that, you've kind of the right-wing narrative here in Israel.
We live in the Middle East.
It's a little bit, well, I see your point. It's very hard. I'm neither nor. I'm all in between, just like you. And it's hard. But I want to give the people the opportunity to listen and watch your stuff. So please tell us where we can find more of your videos.
Okay, it's a YouTube channel called, using my name, which maybe wasn't the brightest thing to do in the beginning, but it's Corey, Corey, Gil, Gil, Shuster, Shuster. But all you have to do is put in ask an Israeli or ask a Palestinian, and you'll find it.
Fascinating questions. Thank you so much for joining us
Very
here.
welcome.
I can't wait to have you back with more questions. You even did them through this recent war. I'm really excited about all of this, and really good luck to you, because
Thanks.
you're inspiring me for sure.
Thanks so
I want to
much.
thank you so much for being with us. If you have questions for Corey, you can also contact me, Molly, at voiceofisrael.com, and have a big falafel day.